Alright, gonna record a guide here going over the path you should take as a fresh level 80 hunter on Wrath of the Lich King servers for like tier 7. This is a PvE guide. I'm Riokaii. Cool, let's go. So, disclaimer to start off, this info is made with my first-hand knowledge and stuff, lots of math. When the alpha and beta gets released for actual like classic Wrath or whatever, more detailed sims, stuff like this, some of this is going to be subject to change. I would say 95 or maybe even higher than that, maybe like 98% of this is going to be correct. But some smaller stuff, trinket procs, engineering chicken with the squawk behavior, whether we'll have the raid released on the launch first thing, more specific APL questions, stuff like the Dark Moon Fair trinkets being available, stuff like that. We'll have more exact answers to those questions as more info comes out, obviously, but it's pretty early. Want to just make this because some other people have started making guides on Wrath stuff, and they're not up to the quality that I was looking for. So I'm making this one for at least the audience that is going to be playing Hunter. So talents and spec and stuff. Survival starts off pretty decently ahead in pre-raid gear. It's about 5 to 10% DPS range. However, the first tier, tier 7, which is Naxxramas, Obsidian Sanctum with Sartharian, and I'm going to consider Sartharian 3 Drakes to be the actual boss there, and Malygos, obviously. And this is 25-man rating. Realistically, that tier is extremely easy, and you will be able to clear all of the content as either one spec, so it's not like where you need to min-max and a 5% or a 5 to 10% DPS loss on one class or one spec in the raid is like going to prevent you from progressing or anything. So yeah, keep that in mind. MM does equalize and I think pulls slightly ahead, but it does require some gameplay stuff optimizing, like trap weaving in melee in this gear in tier 7. And which you play might depend on your comp and preference. Both is viable, BM's not worth really considering. Basically, survival is good on its own, and the fewer hunters are in your raid and things like that, survival is probably the first hunter you'll bring. MM actually scales better when you have more hunters in the raid because they have more extraneous talent points, and so they can start putting them into extra mana regeneration so that you don't have to go into Viper as much, or one of the hunters, the lowest DPS hunter in your raid, ideally, goes the Hunter's Mark glyph and talents to buff all of your other hunters in the raid. So if your raid comp is like 1 or 2 hunters, you might want to be survival. If your raid comp has like 3 or 4 or 5 hunters, that'd be pretty weird, but maybe you do. Then it might be worth maybe 2, 3, or 4 of you going marksman, actually, because you'll scale each other better and be able to take extra talents spread out over the rest of yourselves, kind of. The guide's main focus is going to be MM. I do have mention of the survival like items and stat priority or stat like values or whatever for gear, but basically in pre-raid the gear is basically identical between the two specs, so it doesn't really matter. And you'll be prepared to play both. Your race choice, not really mattering, it's a min-max thing. Troll or Orc for Horde, both are pretty good. Night Elf or Draenei for Alliance. In like absolute endgame BIS, you'll basically want to be Night Elf or Draenei. Early on, there are some good guns, and in tier 7, your BIS weapon, not in pre-raid, but in the actual raid from Naxxramas, is a gun. So Dwarf has some uses, but basically this is the only time where there's an actual decent gun to be using for your endgame weapon, kind of. Although possibly, I forget, in Trial of the Grand Crusader or whatever, but yeah. Don't sweat this too much. Doesn't really matter, actually. Play what you like. Okay, so leveling. Here's your main priorities while leveling. Save up 1,000 gold. You want to get Cold Weather Flying immediately at level 77. Make sure you're doing all the Cure and Tor quests so that you get at least friendly reputation. I believe most of these are in Dragonblight, and there's a few in Crystal Song Forest, and a couple others spread out in a couple other zones, like maybe Zildrak, if I remember right. I might make a separate guide going over like the questing path that you should take, but basically do quests. Don't dungeon grind to 80. That's my recommendation. You need to do quests because rep is important. This is pretty low priority, but Dragonblight quests for the Wormrest Accord, there's not really anything super valuable from Wormrest Accord, so you can just leave it at friendly, but you'll eventually want to get the tabard. You'll want to have it to friendly. You're going to be doing it you're going to be needing to do stuff while leveling anyway. You might as well be doing these quests because you're probably going to be doing them also for Kirin rep and stuff like that. And then at 77, this is when you need to start kind of paying attention in your leveling, I would say. You basically need to do the Storm Peaks intro quest to unlock the Sons of Hodir reputation. Primarily, this comes from, I believe it's like They Took Our Men or something is the quest in K3, is where that chain starts. And then Icecrown Citadel, or not Citadel, Icecrown, the zone, you want to do the Argent Crusade and Ebon Blade reputations. Basically, just do the intro quest there. That'll give you Argent Crusade rep. And then I forget where the Ebon Blade rep starts. It might start as a chain from that, or it might be off the airship. I forget exactly. Anyway, again, separate guide for that. So, you done... Ding, hit 80. Cool. Here's your priority for reputation stuff. First, get Argent Crusade to Exalted. There's a weapon and a Abyss pre-raid chest piece from there and some other good stuff. So that's priority number 1. Second, getting Ebon Blade to Revered. This gives you your two-hand weapon. And some of these also unlock like your like shoulder Helm enchant or whatever. So those are also priority. Then Kirin Tor to Exalted. There's another good item from Kirin Tor. Let's get that to Exalted. Then start working on Sons of Hodir reputation stuff. You can farm Relics of Ulduar. Don't really recommend this. You can buy them off the auction house too. Again, big gap here. 3 arrows. Then Wormrush to Cordon, Alliance Vanguard, Horde Expedition stuff. You could pretty much ignore those. Main thing, once you hit 80, get the tabards and then start farming heroics ASAP. You want to ideally hit 80 with as much time left in the day that you can so that you can do a full sweep of basically every heroic dungeon that you can with a pre-made group, ideally. Hopefully you have a group made to do this with like the gear planned out, so you don't have like 3 hunters in the same group doing this or whatever. You would have ideally 3 different groups with 1 hunter in each group so that you can all like spread your gear out. And you basically want to have like 1 cloth, 1 leather, 1 mail, 1 plate in like each group, plus probably some extraneous thing where like some guy gets the intellect leather, the other person gets the agility leather or whatever, you know, that type of thing. You can do the same thing with like spell power versus strength plate gear. Yeah, anyway. You can buy level 170 plus BOEs if needed, and Random Dungeon Finder, the like system, is unlocked, because that'll give you like badges and gold and stuff like that. If you queue heroics randomly, you might need to do that in later days and weeks rather than having a set group. I would say you want to have a set group mainly for if you're just rushing and doing this like the first day or whatever. If you're leveling slower and you're hitting 80, like not the first like day available or whatever, then the Random Dungeon Finder might be your main path. Leather is okay for this. Partly this is dependent on whether the Random Dungeon Finder has a character item level average minimum in order to queue. Sometimes it might, sometimes it might not, depending on the private server and stuff like that, so who knows. We'll see what Blizzard decides on some of this stuff. Okay, so here's the MM talents. The 3 points are basically left over that you can spend wherever you want. Here's range, Hawkeye range. There's a trap mastery talent. I forget which one of these in the survival one. I'm pretty sure it's this one. Then you've got stuff like rapid recuperation. We notably aren't taking the point in silencing shot. Here's improved arcane shot, improved hunter's mark, and here's efficiency. I don't recommend really getting efficiency. And so basically you can split this up depending on how many other hunters are in your raid, depending on your gear level. Basically the main thing is you're probably going to want to put the earliest points into hit rating, and then just like follow the priority I gave there basically. If you're not doing trap weaving, don't put the points in the trap talent basically. It's like a pretty simple kind of priority thing here. It has pretty easy answers to the questions you might be asking. The main thing is you do need this 1 point, so if you are overcapped on hit, you can remove this point and put it into improved arcane shot or improved hunter's mark, basically, but you do need 1 extra point in this top few rows of the marksman tree to unlock the bottom. So you can't just like remove this point and have 4 points free. You basically always do have 1 point locked in here, and then the other 3 points are free. Okay, what pet should you use? It's a wolf. It has an easy answer. Moving on. Here's the talents you use for the pet. This Dragonhawk thing is the charge, I believe. You can also put this into self-heal and happiness increase, I want to say. But charge is generally better for DPS. It's pretty much it. I would just stick with charge personally, but whatever. Here's kind of your rough rotation priority as playing MM. You get Serpent Sting on the boss, then you kill shot if it's available. Probably can't do that most of the time. Then you press Chimera shot, then aim shot or multi-shot if there's multiple targets. Explosive trap weaving is good damage. Notably, you don't use Immolation Trap because the scaling on it is actually lower total damage dealt over the duration than Explosive Trap. It's weird, even on single target. I know, whatever. Then Arcane Shot. You only use Arcane Shot early on in gearing because you don't have higher amounts of Armor Pen later. Later on, in later tiers, Steady Shot will just replace Arcane Shot entirely, and you drop Arcane Shot entirely from your rotation. You want a Hunter's Mark and track the boss before the pull because we have a talent that increases damage to whatever we're tracking. In Nax, it's like Track Undead. In for Malygos and stuff like that, track Dragonkin, that type of stuff. And then use Volley if there's a bunch of AoE stuff. You can drop Explosive Trap in melee if there's AoE stuff also, and you're close into melee range, and you're not normally trap weaving and things like that. That's for, obviously AoE purposes. Okay. Here's your opener stuff. I'm not going to go through this. Just hold your rapid fire. Don't, refresh it too early. Stuff like that. Figure out if you want to trap weave, if you can, depending on how the boss is going to be being pulled and stuff like that. I forgot to mention in here, but you also want to misdirect on pull, stuff like that. And then, yeah, pretty much that's it. Here's kind of the general notes that go over stuff in more detail. In terms of having multiple hunters and the exact priority you should take and things like that. There's a few open questions. First of all, mana is going to be a problem in your pre-raid gear especially. So that's why we don't take Silencing Shot. Later on, when you have excess intellect and higher total mana pool and mana regen and things like that, you can start incorporating Silencing Shot, and it's an off GCD, so that you can just macro it into all of your other shots and use it on cooldown, and that's going to be a DPS increase. But later, again, right now you have mana problems, so you're going to be going into Viper in a fair amount of the boss fights. If you're in Viper, I'm not sure if it's worth casting Silencing Shot, so it might be worth taking the talent and casting Silencing Shot and getting more mana back from it. I'm not 100% sure on this being worth or not. I would need sims to test it. The math is too complicated for me to figure it out by napkin mathing it. Blessing of Might is better than Blessing of Kings if you don't have 2 Paladin buffs. Feign Death is better than Misdirect if you're having aggro problems. You should still Misdirect on pull though, but by default use Feign Death if you're in the middle of a fight and you're going to overtake on aggro because it's less mana. Here's the stat value points for each spec that kind of defines what gear is going to be used and stuff like that. I put an asterisk. Hit is listed as 1.0 here. In reality, it's going to be higher than agility. It's whatever, it might be 1.6, it might be 1.4 or whatever. It's definitely higher though. I don't know an exact number. It doesn't matter. I normalized it at 1.0 so that you can easily subtract it out if you're going to be above the hit cap. So for example, if I have an item that says it's, you add up all the stats or whatever and do the math for each ratio to each stat that it has on the item and in the available gem sockets and stuff, and the set bonus possibly, it might have 263.5 or whatever, value in equivalency points or something. But it has 13 of that is coming from hit, and I'm overcapped of the hit. So instead of being 263.5, it's just 250.5, right? So you can just subtract 13 at that point. It just makes it easier to compare across items so that if I have a different item that's actually 255 or something and it has no hit rating, I know that item is actually better because that hit rating is useless to me once I'm above the cap. So that's the purpose of that. Okay, so here's your pre-raid BIS stuff for Helm. Plunderer's Helmet from Utgard Keep. Again, I also noted when there's alternative items that have higher hit rating because you're going to be getting new gear and replacing old gear at a pretty steady pace early on, especially, as you're not only getting pre-raid gear, but also getting the earliest tier 7 gear, because you're not going to get all of this gear because the heroics are daily lockout, right? And you're probably going to be clearing the raid within one of the early days of the lockout, probably, maybe not the first day, but within the first 5 probably. And so you'll pick up some of these pieces later. Some of these pieces you might not drop for 2 or 3 weeks anyway, just because they're on a daily lockout and you get unlucky. It happens. So there's alternatives. High hit rating pieces are very useful though, so that you can always get hit cap without having to completely regem all of your gear constantly, or re-enchant your gear even constantly, or just use subpar items when you have actual upgrades. So it's useful to get both pieces of gear and hold on to them. Don't just disenchant them after you get a new one or whatever. This for pre-raid is the pendant, comes from badges, costs 25, or you can get the crafted neck, shoulders. Culling a Stratholme, main thing here, but the other one comes from Ebonblade Revered, and it's very, very, very close to the BIS one. So that's why Ebonblade Revered is a priority. And then there's the hit rating alternative. Cloak comes from Violent Hold. So Violent Hold, there's like, I forget how many bosses available, but only I think 2 or 3 of the non-last boss are active each day. And so it's on a rotation. So some days there'll be bosses up that just drop no items that are useful for you. You still generally want to do the dungeon for badges in that case, but it's like a lower priority, obviously. So but the end boss is always the same. So if the item comes from the end boss of Violet Hold, it's pretty reliable to acquire. If it's on the rotation boss, it's harder to get, though, because it's not only not available every day, and it's a chance that you might get it, or it might drop, or you might win the roll or whatever, but it's also a chance that the boss won't even be available that day, right? So the alternative is the Honored Cloak from Argent Crusade. That's 100% consistent. You can get that. And then for survival, this one is also roughly equal to the other one that you can get if you want, but this one's reputation, so it's 100% acquisition. BIS is Argent Crusade Exalted. This is the only one you really need to start out with, and it comes from reputation, so don't worry about these other ones. Eventually, you'll want to get the tier, but you'll probably be getting this at the eye level 213 from acquiring it in 25-man raids, and that's why it's lowest priority for spending badges, because it's also not even better. I believe it's not better if you have the 2 and 4-piece than this in pre-raid gear, but you can only acquire 2-piece in pre-raid, so because you'll only have the chest and the gloves available to you. But even with the 2-piece active, it's not better than the Argent Crusade chest. Okay, bracers. These come from Nexus Heroic. And the other ones are crafted, so there's your alternative there. Gloves, these come from the last boss of Violet Hold, so they don't have the same issue. Alternatively, you can get the tier gloves. Those are pretty good, but they're lower priority for spending badges, mostly because the way you determine your priority for spending badges is what is the DPS upgrade over the alternative for the amount of badges I'm spending. So because this costs so many badges, for the amount of DPS, like you might only get 60 DPS for 60 badges. It's like 1 DPS per badge, but a different item might give you 2 DPS per badge. So when you only have 30 badges to spend or whatever, or 60 badges to spend, you could spend it getting 120 DPS or 60 DPS, right? So that's why you have that priority on badges. It's not just the strict item upgrade, it's the item upgrade per badge cost kind of thing. Okay. Then there's alternatives there. You can get high hit item. It's leather, but it's still worth using anyway. Leather items don't really have a penalty to being used. It's just they're going to be in higher like conflict with rogues and other people, feral druids or whatever that might want these items. So they're kind of harder to get at the same time, but they are still useful, and hunters do use some leather items over the course of Wrath as like BIS items even. Belt comes from badges. It's kind of low priority for badges spending though, so these alternatives are better. One is BOE, so you can pick that up. Legs come from Halsstone Heroic, Oculus, or some crafted ones. I don't recommend necessarily like wasting a bunch of gold to get these crafted stuff, by the way, because you're going to replace these items so easily, but it's like if they're cheap, if you have excess gold because you've been playing TBC and classic vanilla and stuff like that, then you can spend it if you want, but like make this choice yourself. I'm not going to tell you what to do. All right. Boots, Violet Hold, again, boss rotation makes this one harder to get, so the next best options are from Nexus Heroic. There's not really much other alternatives there, so go with those. Band of the Kirin Tor, again, determine for your own self whether it's worth spending 8,500 gold for a ring that you're going to probably replace fairly quickly, and is having the kind of maybe second best, maybe not even second best BIS ring in Tier 7 really worth it to you? I kind of probably doubt it, but if you have a bunch of gold, sure, go for it. I'm probably going to just be using Mobius Band Hemorrhaging Circle just because you'll replace these items so easily, and Impact Band isn't that good. Here's something that is probably maybe worth spending money depending on how much it costs, obviously, and depending on how much gold you have. Darkmoon Card Greatness from the Nobles Spec is BIS basically through Tier 7 raid, and it's competitive with the Ulduar BIS trinkets, so it will last you basically 2 entire tiers, so that is pretty worth it, and it's significantly stronger than pretty much everything else. Mirror of Truth is also very strong. That's our first priority for spending badges. It's a big DPS upgrade, and it's only 40 badges, so that's pretty good. And then there's a big gap, so basically those two trinkets are the only ones that are really, really strong. These other ones are not that great, and you will replace them with raid trinkets fairly easily. The other two are harder to replace with raid trinkets, if that makes sense. Again, there's a high hit option in there. Cool. Moving on. Melee stuff for your melee weapon. It's a stat stick. Rune Blade of Demonstrable Power comes from a rep reward, so just prioritize getting that. If you don't have the rep yet or whatever, you can consider these other options, but yep, that's about it. Ranged weapon, Drake Mounted Crossbow is your BIS. Nesting Warrior 4000, I would also say probably don't waste the money on this because it's probably going to be decently expensive to craft. You can get a, it's either Pierce's Pistol or Zombie Super Shotgun. They are the identical same item, as you can see. But you get this from rep, and Nesting Warrior isn't that big of an upgrade over it. And you're going to be replacing Nesting Warrior anyway as soon as you get raid weapons. So I would just go for the rep thing, and if Drake Mounted Crossbow drops for you, then thumbs up, be happy with that. Cool. Here's what you should do for gems in those items. This is only the actual items that I listed as Preraid BIS. I'm not going to go through all the gem combinations for what you should use for the alternative items and like every possible permutation of combinatorics that you could have of everything. Yeah, basically you have certain rating thresholds for hit you want to hit. After that, just gem agi or agi crit if the set bonus is worth losing the tiny amount of agility, like equivalency points, stuff like that. And obviously if you're Alliance, you can factor in the racial where you need 1% less hit. So yeah, if you're Horde, you're going to have to gem harder for hit. Sorry, it sucks, whatever. You kind of have better racials to make up for it, to be fair. Here's your priority for spending Heroism badges, just to have that separate and clearly. Trinket, then neck, then gloves, belt, chest. You won't really ever use the chest, and it's a bunch of badges, so pretty much the first 4 are the only ones that matter, and kind of only the first 3, or the first, yeah, whatever. Glyphs, these are the ones you use. You can swap glyphs if you want for like Malygos parsing stuff, but otherwise you pretty much just stick with the first 3 glyphs pretty much all the time. Professions, there's been debate on this, and we probably have to wait for Sims to come out. Tailoring should have the highest peaks for parsing, but it might not be the highest average DPS, if that makes sense. So Sims might, they give you like a margin of like the peak and the minimum, max and min, but they also give you the average. So depending on what you value, do you value only getting the rank 1 parse, you know, after doing it 10 or 20 weeks in a row and, you know, getting the lucky pull where everything lined up with your procs, then you can go tailoring. Otherwise, jewel crafting and blacksmithing are probably the 2 more consistent options. Or engineering, this is kind of the utility option. You get stuff like nitro boots, parachute cloak that you can use with disengage, stuff like that. It has a on-use haste active on the glove, and it has a couple different enchants and stuff like that. But yeah, basically those are the 4 professions you can choose. Kind of any combination of 2 of these is going to be good enough. And again, don't overthink it too hard. If one of these is like especially better for gold making for you or whatever you prefer doing that, go for it. Here's the enchants you'll use. I listed some alternative options if you're like cheap on gold or for some reason like mats aren't available early on. I don't know why that would really be the case, but yeah, some of these are pretty competitive as options compared to the primary one. Yeah, it's all basically just get the stats that are good kind of thing. Here's your consumables. You might have a case where you overcap on haste if you have rapid fire, lust, and the potion of speed stuff. Potion of wild magic might and is probably actually just better, but I have rarely seen people use it, and it's always kind of confused me, but whatever, because I think wild magic is just more stat equivalency points or whatever compared to 500 haste, basically. And the spiced mammoth treats are obviously pretty like unimportant, but you can use this to give like, I think it's strength to your pet and make it do more damage. It's really minor, but if you care that much, it's technically here. Okay, cool. So that's all I got. That is everything that you should need to know for pre-raid stuff. I might make another guide, again, possibly going over questing stuff. Also, possibly I'll make another one for sure, probably going over the BIS for like the raid items actually, and your BIS going into Ulduar and stuff like that. Cool. Thanks for watching.